test episode. I think that would be the way to go. Keystroke meeting. Yeah. Oh, we are live. Hey, that's pretty cool. That's a neat trick. Okay. So, hey, good evening, mediums. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. We're here to talk with Kacey Ezell. She's an Air Force pilot, wife, mother, cat mom, and prolific author. I'm probably going to miss some things, but let's go into some of the things she's done recently with anthologies. She's published The Black Tide Rising and Forged in Blood from Bane, in all the four Horsemen universe anthologies, including Keystroke Medium's fantasy anthology, Kingdoms of Iron and Stone, also in the Noir Fatale anthology, which she co-edited with Larry Correia. And she's also in the Lost Signals of the Terran Republic and Those in Peril. And most recently, the We Dare anthology from both Chris Kennedy Publishing. Boy, I'm doing great today. So I'm kind of going through there. You've been on a couple of shows, Kacey. Awesome. And welcome, Lauren.
Back. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I think Kalene's coming, but we sent her the link late, so she may jump in at like complete random.
That would be awesome.
You know what? So I apologize for the rough start. You know, I haven't done an intro for like 2.5 years. They brought me out of retirement, so like some sort of thing for that. And we had the darkest pre-show ever. So it was great. Good time.
Josh is out at T-ball right now with his children. He's being a father. He's being a family man. We miss him, but we'll try to press on tonight.
Yeah, we're going to squeak by.
Yeah.
Hopefully this won't be the one that brings us down, right? Oh, there's Kalene.
There's Kalene.
Hello.
Hello.
I know I'm crashing the party tonight. Woo woo.
Crash it. Kacey, you want to fill us in, Kacey, kind of what you've been up to lately? And
yeah, man. So it's been kind of a busy month. My second book in my solo series called, the series is called Psyche War. The second book is called The World Asunder. It came out last Friday, and I'm very excited about it. So far, initial reactions are pretty positive, which is very, very cool. So that's available now from Theogony Books, which is one of Chris Kennedy's imprints. That's the sequel to Minds of Men, which was my debut novel, came out November of 2017. So kind of behind the power curve on the whole get your series out.
It's a rapid release.
You got it out, man.
Yeah, it's not a rapid release.
It's like a rapid release. It's a George R.R. Martin rapid release paradigm.
But you're giving us hope. You're giving us hope. We can get one out, and then no matter what life throws at us, we can get that second one out.
You can, in fact, yeah. You can even write, let's see, three other novels and then get your other one out. I mean, it's not necessarily a recommended technique, but you can do it.
It can happen. It's a military phrase that no plan survives contact or first contact.
Yeah, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, or in this case, the audience. So.
Right. We plan to do a rapid release, but not so much.
Yeah.
The exact opposite.
So that's been pretty cool. The week prior to that, we, as you mentioned, We Dare, edited by Jamie Ibsen, came out. Josh and I sort of kind of collaborated. We wrote a mirrored story together. So
I heard some tales about that collaboration. There might have been some last minute Skyping involved, like down to the wire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because, if you wait till last minute, it only takes a minute. But no, it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. Writing that story. And so next time you guys see Josh, make sure you tell him that you're all on Team Carrie.
Oh, yeah.
Because Carrie clearly is the better operative.
Right. Yeah, we definitely are. I got a tattoo. I just got it. I can't show it because it's too fresh.
That would be hilarious. We should all get like temporary tattoos.
Yeah, Team Carrie tattoo.
So mediums in the chat, next time you see Josh, tell him that you're Team Carrie.
Team Carrie. Hashtag Team Carrie.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Oh, we got a bunch of questions to go into, but since we were just talking about Minds of Men and your first one and the follow-up, do you want to kind of tell us the premise of that for people who haven't heard you talk about that before? For
sure. So the Psyche of War is sometimes people call it alternate history, sometimes people call it secret history, but it is a military-themed, I'll go with secret history, that postulates what if certain women, and they're all women because I'm sexist, have always had throughout humanity's existence, some women have been psychic. But it's kind of been kept on the DL, right? So the premise of Minds of Men is that in 1943, when 8th Air Force, which was an organization, and U.S. Army Air Forces organization flying B-17 bombers out of England, doing high-altitude daylight precision bombing over occupied Europe. In 1943, they were kind of getting their asses handed to them because number one, they're just, it's dangerous flying, right? Combat aviation is no joke, and especially in that type of situation. But the other thing that they really lacked was long-range fighter support. The fighter support that they had in 1943, they didn't have the legs, they didn't have the fuel capacity to actually escort the bombers all the way to the target and back. So one of the things that sort of turned that tide was when the P-51 showed up, because that's, it was a long-range fighter. Anyway, prior to that, their losses were horrific, and you should, if you have a minute, go look that up, because it's pretty sobering when you think about how many men would go out on these missions and how many would not come back. So the premise of my story is, what if there were these women who are psychic? What if one of the high muckety mucks in the Army Air Corps knew about them and recruited some of them to come and fly on board these B-17s and essentially act as human radios? Because the thing about the way that the B-17s would fly without their fighter escort is the nickname of the B-17 is the Flying Fortress, because that's really what it was, right? It's right. And it would absolutely bristle with defensive weaponry, and they would fly very close. I'm talking like a pilot now with my hands. They would fly very close formations so that they could have crossing fields of fire to defend themselves and each other. Well, flying close formation is really hard, and it would be
at night while taking fire.
Well, this was daytime, but yeah, during the daytime,
okay.
Yeah, while taking fire in the weather. Out in an unpressurized aircraft at 30,000 feet, with flak, and then of course Luftwaffe fighters, right? So really hard, really dangerous to do, and the instrumentation and the avionics that the B-17s had were primitive. I mean, compared to what I fly 1969 model aircraft, and those are like old school, right? These are like ancient school compared to compared to modern avionics. So the point is, it's really hard, right? So you put these women on board to, help them fly tighter formation and see if they're more successful flying their missions, and they are. And then, so the story of Minds of Men follows Evelyn Adamson, and she's one of the psychics, and she's on a bird that gets shot down at a certain point. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler, yeah.
Right.
Right after you give it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it turns out that, the book's been out for almost 2 years, so, get on it, right?
If you haven't read it by now, shame on you.
Yeah, come on. I'm pretty sure it was assigned reading from the last time that you're on the show.
It turns out that the Germans have psychics too, and one of them is looking for Evie and her surviving crew members, and so we end up doing like a chase through occupied Europe, utilizing the resistance-led escape lines, which were actually really, really interesting to read about. They smuggled, hundreds, maybe thousands of airmen, downed Allied airmen through occupied Europe and back to friendly forces, or even neutral forces sometimes. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. Yeah. Or neutral countries, I should say, not neutral forces. But so that's Minds of Men. The World Asunder, book 2, picks up in 1948. So 3 years after the end of World War II, and it starts in the opening days of the Berlin airlift. And the point of view character is this time is Lena Suharin, who is the antagonist of book 1. And so the World Asunder follows her through kind of as the Iron Curtain is going down over Berlin, or over at least East Berlin, and she's sort of trying to figure out how to put the world back together after it's been shattered by war, and finding herself making some unexpected alliances and stuff. It's essentially a Cold War spy thriller with psychics. So
cool.
Yeah, I like it. I'm happy with it. So I hope you guys like it too.
That's been really difficult to plot out, because on the one hand, you're wading through all of this historical stuff. It's something that happened, like 80 years ago, or
right.
It's on a different continent, and then you're throwing in this element that changes everything, like psychic women. That changes everything that could be in the history.
Right.
Yeah. So how'd you balance that? Like, first of all, the research, and then second of all, figuring out what changes could be made with the psychic women.
Well, what I did, so the way that it sort of worked out was, I knew that I wanted to write around the time period of the Berlin airlift, and I knew that I wanted to write about Lena. And so, I started reading about those things, and that's such an interesting time period anyway, right? There's so much going on. The world was essentially realigning itself. And I found a couple of other historical, like actual historical things that I thought were interesting. One of which was a program called Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was.
I just did an interview with the author of that. It was really good. She was on Joe Rogan, I think.
Oh yeah. I read her book, and it was fantastic. But yeah, it's this program where Nazi scientists were invited to or persuaded to basically come and work for the United States government doing various things. Most of our space program, for example, came from research, that was done by Nazi rocket scientists working the V rocket program. Werner von Braun is the most famous representative of that type, but also other areas of expertise like aerospace medicine, right? Every flight doc that I've ever gone to the doctor to see, they all train through a program that was founded by Operation Paperclip alums, basically. And then lots in chemistry and all this kind of stuff. So I thought that was a really fascinating episode in history, because the whole concept was, well, yeah, these are bad dudes, but we'd rather have them be our bad dudes than the Soviets' bad dudes, right?
Everybody's fighting for talent.
Right. Exactly. We want their expertise. We want their knowledge. We want it, if for no other reason than to keep the Soviets from having it. And that was such a quintessentially Cold War flavored attitude that I couldn't resist it. So that was sort of one of the things that I I called it something else. I think I called it Operation Confiscate in my book, but it's essentially, I modeled it after Operation Paperclip as one of the structures that I used in The World Asunder, to sort of build the story around.
So you'd have like the Nazi version of using psychic women, maybe even experimenting on them, and then the US version of like, psychic women are on our team. So
the way that I did it is that, so Lena, in the first book, Lena was actually a member of the SS Auxiliary. So she was very much a villain in the first book. And then after the fall of the Third Reich and after the sack of Berlin, which, I use that, I don't know that a lot of people call it that, but I use that term deliberately because when Berlin fell to the Soviet Red Army, it really was sacked in the like ancient armies sense of the word. It was chaos. There was no discipline. There was no control. There was no restraint. And it was a very, very ugly episode. And, to this day, there are people who remember that, and remember that, what their mothers and their grandmothers and went through, and not just the women, but for a lot of reasons, it's sort of seared in, it's very closely associated with the suffering of the women who lived there. Let's put it that way. I totally lost my train of thought.
we were talking about stealing scientists and psychics and converting them over in Operation.
So after that, Lena's, because at the end of the first book, Lena hates Americans because, they're the enemy, right? And so at the beginning of the second book, yes, the Americans are still her enemy, but she kind of hates the Soviets more because, the violence and the evil that they visited upon her is more recent than the evil that the Americans visited upon her, you know, from her perspective too.
Right.
So, you know, it was, I tried to structure it such that the women in the story were as much combatants in their own way as the men actually, you know, pulling the triggers during these wars. So,
yep.
Yeah.
Everybody had to bring something.
Right.
To the conflict.
Yeah. So.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and through all of that, we have a Lee Ellen McCartney says she finished the book yesterday, loved it. And
That's
a Yvonne, and a Yvonne Jacobs says, "Hello, excellent book." So,
thanks, Yvonne.
I got some fans there. Even if it's mom, I still count my mom.
Yeah, Lee Ellen McCartney is my mother, so she's.
We'll try to keep it clean. Or not. All right.
She's well for.
Yeah, I imagine she probably knows. So.
Speaking of your mom, how did you first get into writing and then develop that along with getting into the Air Force and becoming a pilot? Like, how did these two careers happen at the same time?
So, well, the first one, the writing career, is kind of mom's fault. When I was about 7 years old, I was bothering her one day, and she probably, I was looking for something to read, and she was like, "Here, go read this. It's for kids." And she handed me a copy of Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Drums, which was like the third book in the series, right? So I don't know where book 1 and 2 were, but that was the one she had. So she was like, "Here, go read this." And I read it, and I fell in love with it. You'll figure it out. Right. So I fell in love with, you know, the concept of the dragons and, you know, just the whole structure of it. And shortly after that, she bought me the original Dragon Riders of Pern series, the first 3 books, and I devoured them. We
talked about that a lot in the first time you came on the show. We talked a lot about the Dragon Riders of Pern.
Yeah. So from that, I decided I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted to be a science fiction fantasy writer, and I wanted to be a dragon writer and writer.
Nice.
There you
go. Being the logical 9-year-old that I was, I decided, well, there's not a lot of dragons running around, so I guess I'll go fly airplanes instead. And then in pilot training, I realized helicopters were going to be more fun for me personally. So that's how
dragons.
Well, dragons. I mean, if somebody offered me a dragon tomorrow, I'd probably take it. But
give it a try.
Have been a lot of fun. Yeah. So
I hear they're hard to maintain and care for.
Dragons or helicopters?
Dragons. Well, yeah.
I mean, both probably. But yeah, so that's kind of how I did that. And then as far as like, you know, becoming a writer, I just, you know, I'd always told stories. I'd always kind of written for fun. And I, you know, from attendance at Dragon Con in Atlanta, one day I met John Ringo, who's a military sci-fi author. And we became friends and corresponded for a number of years. And then when I was deployed, he sent me an email one time saying, "Hey, I'm doing this anthology of military science fiction written by military veterans. Would you like to send me something?" And so I did, and that's how it got started. Oh.
Off to the races.
Off to the races, yeah.
John Ringo's the Prince Rogers series. I'm not sure if that's what it's actually called. That's one of my.
That's what everyone calls it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my absolute favorites, and especially the audiobook. I think it's Stephen Rudnicki or something is the guy's name. Oh, yeah. One of the most amazing narrators I've ever heard.
That's cool. Yeah, I hadn't heard the audiobook version of it, but yeah, his the Prince Rogers series that he wrote with David Weber is widely, it's very popular among his fans.
Anybody who's even remotely into audiobooks should definitely put that at the top of the list. I've listened to it like 4 times.
That's cool.
It's good stuff.
Prince Rogers series?
Yeah, it's 4 books by John Ringo and David Weber, but it feels more like it's by John Ringo.
I think he did most of the drafting of it.
Yeah.
So.
We had an interesting conversation. We were talking to David Weber in California, and he was telling the story about writing with John Ringo and how they had this big discussion about how many of these enemies are supposed to come across this bridge. He says, "Well, how many people do you have, and how many can walk side by side?" And so you're going to need like 8 bridges. So they redesign the whole thing so they converge on this bridge system rather than just one bridge. And it's interesting.
That's funny. Yeah, that's cool.
So here's a question for you, military science fiction writers. How do you keep track of all of your battles and armies and the terrain, and how do you manage all these different forces and build your plot from it? So as a romance author, that's not something that I have to deal with, but I know in fantasy, epic fantasy, you have to do that, and science fiction, you have to do that. So how do you keep track of it all?
So for me, keeping track of, I mean, it's kind of like anything else. You make notes, right? You make copious notes. You know, a lot of my notes I tend to attach to characters. So I'm a Scrivener user, and I really like the character sheet function in Scrivener, and I will just make notes, you know, that are attached to specific characters on their character sheet that I can link to whatever scenes, you know, in the document if I want to. To, you know, just sort of keep track of things. So like, you know, this person is assigned to this unit with this other individual, and they, you know, they did this together and whatnot. And as I go, so I don't know, you know, in the pantser plotter world, I sort of conceptualize that as a spectrum, and I'm somewhere in the middle. You know, I'm
on the spectrum.
I'm bipolar. I don't know.
Plot terrific.
Right. But so I will generally plot things out and have an idea of the kind of the high points, but a lot of the details I sort of discover as we go along. And so those are the details that I'll record in those notes. And so when it comes to now, I haven't written a lot of like land battle types of stuff. The battles that I have written, the battle scenes that I have written have all pretty much been aerial. So for me, just, I guess that's just sort of easier to visualize. But I do know, like my buddy Jason Cordova, who he's got a couple of Four Horsemen books. He writes the Kin Wars series, which is a really fantastic military sci-fi series. I've seen him plotting these things out, and he'll draw it out like a battle map, you know, and he'll say, okay, you know, this is happening here, and he'll make little notes, you know, just on a piece of paper or whatever. And I don't know if he keeps them consolidated or transfers them to another medium or something like that. But yeah, you know, if you have to have a visual, sometimes like a visual representation will help. I did when Chris Smith and I, while we were working on our collaboration with John Ringo, we did, I had like a map. Like, it was literally a Google map that I screenshotted and imported into like PowerPoint, and I would like make notes on the map because it's you know, kind of a buildings Roman story, right? So there's the whole hero's journey, literally a journey happening. And so, you know, I would make notes like, okay, this is where this confrontation is happening, and this is where this confrontation is happening, stuff like that. So.
And you might have done something similar with the two books that you just wrote, only the one set in Berlin and the other one. Does Lena come back to the United States? At the very end, yes. At the very end, she comes back to the United States. So, yeah, it's mostly set in. And you know what? Now that you mention it, I did do that. I did a lot of screenshotting of Google Maps because they travel outside of Berlin into Germany, and then I have to get them across to the American sector down by Frankfurt. So there's a lot of like, okay, well, how long does this take by walking? And I love the Google Maps walk versus car feature because it's so much. That way I'm not like, okay, how fast? You know, I'm not doing math, but it's like, or, you know, I can just plug it in and be like, okay, if I had to walk from, you know, Berlin to Frankfurt, you know, or take a cart pulled by a donkey, it'd probably be slightly faster than walking. So, you know, it just makes it easier to estimate.
Right. Keep it in the realm of possibility.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
What I like to do with battles is I'll go start from kind of the high altitude view or the big view of the battle, but then I'll go real tight focus on like one or two characters.
Yeah.
It makes it easier to manage. But sometimes people die in the story, but then they are magically back to life later because you forgot you killed them. Big battle, that's a danger. So that's
what good editors are for.
Yeah.
Hey, this person was just dead on like 3 pages ago.
Yeah, that's the real answer. Get a really good editor.
Right.
Write whatever you want and have a really good editor.
So The other point I want to make about this is that, you know, one of the things that I see in the most successful military science fiction that I've seen, it doesn't matter how large the battle is, but they'll do exactly that. You know, they'll zoom in and you'll experience the battle through the point of view of one individual character. Because at the end of the day, the story isn't about the mass movements of troops and equipment and, you know, all of the pieces that make up an actual battle confrontation. The story is about the human element, and you can substitute whatever species if you're not writing specific, you know, if your characters aren't technically human. But it's about what makes us connect with those characters, and that's that human element. And then, you know, speaking from my very limited experience with combat, it's kind of that way in real life too. You know, you're not right there in that moment. You're not caring about the big movements of things. You're just caring about keeping your buddy alive and keeping yourself alive, you know, keeping your crew alive. So
probably whatever you thought about the bigger picture was probably wrong by the time it all got done, because you have one idea.
Yeah, because you
focus on your job.
Yeah, you literally don't know. I mean, there's a whole term for it. It's called the fog of war. You can't see what's going on over there because you're so busy dealing with what's happening, you know, right in front of you. And so to successfully write military science fiction, you have to capture that aspect of not knowing. You know, you as the writer might have an omniscient God's eye view, but you're the only one, you know, and your characters can't and not have it be successful or ring true. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
that's a good point.
And that kind of works for whatever genre you're writing in too, like not just military science fiction.
Sure. Yeah.
But, you know, who doesn't love a little bit of mystery and awe in any genre?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I would argue. I mean, a romance novel where there's no, you know, where the characters just sort of instantly, like there's no conflict there. They just sort of instantly have, you know, everything is great and they have a perfect understanding of one another, and there's no, you know, and so there's no conflict, there's no story.
Yeah, no, that's what the story's about. It's about them getting together and all the things in between, and then, you know, the final.
Right.
You know, they got to chase him to the airport and say, no, I actually, you know.
Right. Yeah. There is an element of that in The World Asunder too, actually, now that I think about it. I mean, the point of the story is not necessarily for them to get together. So I wouldn't characterize it as a romance because that's not the end goal. But there is definitely a romantic subplot that feeds fairly heavily into, you know, what the end goal is, which is, you know, I'd say probably redemption. It's a redemption story arc.
We talk a lot about writing good characters and deep characters and not one-dimensional characters. And I don't see how you can write characters that's not at least part of their worldview or their, you know, the relationships, whatever time has to, it's somewhere be in their backstory or front story or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, that's what's interesting to us as humans, I'd argue, is how we interact with other people. And so that's what's interesting about other people, is how they interact with the other people, with themselves, sometimes with their environment. And so, you know, without getting into that and seeing how those interactions change them and affect them, again, it gets boring.
Yep. Well, and I'd like to say that even if it's not the romantic angle in relationships, I think it's one of the things that's popular about military science fiction is a lot of times it's like a squad level thing or the team, and those character interactions and, you know, dynamics and things go right and wrong. Mm-hmm. I think that's what makes the stories the most entertaining. That's why it's a really popular genre right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a podcaster called Dan Carlin. He does hardcore history. I don't know. Awesome. You're familiar? You're the one that
started on that, yeah.
Yeah, he's amazing. And one of the things he talks about all the time on his hardcore history podcast is that he's interested in the extremes of human experience. So war is definitely an extreme of human experience, which is why he has so many podcasts on war. But I would argue that so is love. You know, that the strong emotions that go into love in whatever form, right? So certainly parental love is an extreme, you know, that people don't, I think, understand until they experience it as a parent. And then, you know, romantic love. I mean, those are some of the strongest emotions that people are ever going to feel in their lifetimes. And so that's what makes it so interesting to everyone else, is that, you know, the depth of that connection and how that affects people and affects their world and their decisions and stuff.
Now, where do you come up with your characters in order to pull at that kind of emotion? Are the characters all like coming from your head, or are there specific people that you know that you're like, oh, you're going in my book? Or do you get them from other books, other movies? Like, where do you get your inspiration for those characters?
It depends. So sometimes I Tuckerize people. I had so in the World of Sunder, I intended to have a small Tuckerization of my friend Doc Woolrab. It actually grew into rather a larger Tuckerization of Doc because the character just kept showing up. I kept needing a doctor, and he just kept showing up. So, the like Lena and Evie, they kind of just sort of showed up in my head. Not quite fully formed, but like they showed up in my head with a specific character trait, I'll say. So Evelyn, I knew she was, you know, I picked her name, and I knew right away that she was going to be kind of tall with brown hair and sort of shy and not super comfortable socially. Like, she wasn't going to be a social butterfly. She was going to be sort of retiring and reticent. But she has this incredible strength of her power. And the rest of it sort of grew out from that. With Lena, she actually formed in my head more quickly than Evie did. I knew she was ambitious. I knew she was extremely pragmatic, and she became more so, you know, after the end of the war, simply because I think you have to, right? I mean, the more crap stuff you survive, the more pragmatic you have to become to a certain extent, and you narrow your focus of what matters to, you know, okay, well, these children matter to me. You don't matter to me so much, but I'm gonna take care of these children. So they, you know, I mean, it's like anything else. I got to know them better as I started writing them, but they sort of started with an interesting character facet that I wanted to explore.
That is, I kind of want to get into like how you don't have the words for it. Had the words are gone, facets, pin in that. I'm going to do an ad read, and we're going to get back into that.
Okay.
Yay, we remembered the ad read. Always a great thing.
This episode of Live is brought to you by Wholesale Slaughter by Rick Partlow. A king can't defeat an army of lawless pirates, but a mercenary can. Logan Conner is the son of a king, the heir to the largest of the 5-star dominions, and the best mech pilot in the galaxy. His people are plagued by pirates and raiders, surrounded by enemies, and not even his father can fight them all. Logan gives up his position, his rank, even his name, and becomes Jonathan Slaughter, leader of a rough-and-ready band of mercenary mech-jocks, bent on taking the battle to the enemy on their own terms. They're wholesale slaughter. Kicking ass is what they do. Get book 1 in this thrilling and unpredictable military sci-fi adventure today. Also available on Audible, narrated by the award-winning Mark Veeder.
Excellent.
That sounds fun.
I actually just got that on WhisperSync like 2 hours ago. I had the ebook already. I'm like, oh, WhisperSync for $1.99 more. I get an audiobook for $2. Yay!
Yeah.
It's always a good time.
Love it.
Yeah, I love audiobooks. I'm so excited. So the narrator who did Minds of Men for us, her name's Jennifer Gillaraya. Fantastic. She's so good. She did such a great job of bringing Evie to life. She's going to do the audiobook for The World of Sunder too. And I'm super excited about it. That's why I can't stop talking about it.
That's awesome.
Does she do German accents?
She did. Yeah. So I don't know how she'll do The World of Sunder because the whole thing's mostly through Lena's point of view. But when she did Minds of Men, so Evie just had, you know, an American accent like she would. This is what a pro Jennifer is. She had to do just sort of Midwestern American accent. She had to do Brooklyn. She had to do like Louisiana Acadian. She had to do Puerto Rican. And then going over to Europe, she had to do British, French, Belgian/Dutch, German, and Basque.
That's not hard on the tongue at all.
Yeah, I would have. If I had been her, I'd have been like, "You got to pay me more. I think I get a bonus for every 3 languages I have to accent that in."
She did a good job, yeah. So she really did.
Good deal.
All right, so you were talking about characters, and you said that you pick one facet to kind of focus on, and then throw them in your story and let them develop. How do you?
That's how it worked out with these two.
Kalene, were you going to ask, like, how does she, like, pick that facet or, like, know which one to use, or what were you
I was just kind of like wondering, like, what's sort of like either the thought process behind that or like kind of how like that particular facet might tie into, you know, that initial plot arc, especially getting into that first, you know, quarter of the book to shock things out.
Right. So it comes from the theme, right? So you know, the major theme that I explored in Minds of Men was, what is it that war does to you? How does it, you know, when you experience these experiences, and especially when you experience them, you know, through the minds of 10 other people as well as your own, how is that going to change you? And so for that, I kind of wanted a relative blank canvas to sort of see those developments happen. And so that's why I started with someone who has not necessarily a very strong personality at the beginning. She's just sort of, I don't know if passive is the right word, but you know what I mean? Reticent or shy, and not someone who's going to put herself out there, even though she does have this, you know, incredible amount of power. And by power, I mean psychic power. What?
A little bit more reserved.
Yes, yeah, yes, she's very reserved. The other thing too is I was also playing with this idea. I mean, it's 1943, right? So being a lady meant something very different than it does today, and especially being a lady, you know, being a woman serving in, because Evie and her friends, they served as members of the Women's Army Corps, right, the WACs. So being a woman in the military meant something very different in 1943 than it does today, and the expectations of their demeanor and their attitude and their behavior was very different than what's expected of me and, you know, my fellow sisters in arms. You know, the way in which we interact with the men that we serve with is different than how those women would have interacted with their men. And I wanted to kind of play with that too, because one of the other themes of the whole series is that when you have that sort of intimate and close connection with someone, how does that shape the way that you interact with them? And so you see that I played with that quite a bit and actually in both books. So that's sort of why I wanted to start with someone who was, like you said, a little bit more reserved. With Lena in The World Asunder, again, her character was somewhat already formed by the events of the first book because she's the antagonist, and I knew that I had someone who was, well, she was pissed, right? She's really, really angry because her world fell apart, and everything that she believed in, she believed she was a member of the SS Auxiliary. She believed in, you know, the greatness of the Reich, not necessarily because of, you know, what we associate it with, like all the horribleness, but all of the things that the propaganda emphasized, right? The greatness of the German people and she believed the hype. Right, exactly. She believed the hype because the propaganda was very effective. I mean, Goebbels knew what the hell he was doing, right? And to have that all come apart on her, and then to have her world just be, you know, destroyed the way that it was, to have to deal with the events of the first book, which the events of the first book were also very traumatic to her. And I come back to that in the second book as well. That's going to give me, as a starting point, someone who's pretty broken. And at the beginning of the book, you know, the opening line of the book is she remembered who she was, or something like that. Because prior to that, she had essentially shut herself down and didn't realize, or wasn't using her power, had basically cut herself off from the world. And so everything from then on was part of that redemption arc theme that I talked about. And how do you take something that's broken, someone that's broken, and how do they make themselves whole again?
This might be a spoiler, but I'm kind of curious. Does Lena ever find out what the Nazis did to the Jews? Because I imagine if you have psychic powers and you come to understand like the enormity of what was done, and you thought you were the good guys.
Right. Well, it's even worse than that, because she, during the Reich, she was, during the first book, she's employed as an interrogator. That's how they used her abilities, is, and in the second book, multiple times, there's multiple points at which she is forcibly confronted with what that meant and her own culpability in that, in what they did. So, yeah. It was also a bit of a challenging exercise for me too, because one of the things that I really like to do is, so I can't remember who said this, but they were way, way smarter than me. But every villain is the hero of their own story, right? So, I really wanted to make Lena the hero of her own story. And, so in trying to put everything through her perspective, and it was, I really wanted the audience I wanted her experiences to resonate with them. And I wanted the audience to sympathize with her. But she's a Nazi.
Right. Yeah. How can I get the majority of the people who I know who are going to read this sympathize with a Nazi?
Right. So, well, I mean, right. To be fair, she's not a Nazi anymore, because there are no Nazis, there's no Nazi party at the end of, but yeah, exactly. She was an intelligence interrogator who, like I show her at the beginning, she's doing at the beginning of Minds of Men, she's doing an interrogation and trying to get, members of the Polish resistance. She's trying to get names so that they can, be arrested. And at that point, she's like, well, I'm just doing my job. I've just done my job. My job is to find dissenters and enemies, and I found them. And she doesn't think too much about what happens to them after that. Well, in The World of Thunder, she's confronted and has to think about that information, about, those next sequence of events, and kind of has to come to grips with that and figure out a way to wrap her mind around that and stuff. So
well, that's some of the most compelling stories, is when you're rooting for somebody you don't want to root for, but that's a powerful, like I watched John Wick 3 the other day. Yeah. And John Wick 3 is a mass murderer. Right. I mean, there's just really no way to justify it. Yeah. But we all root for him to win, because he's been through a lot.
Yeah. So
oh man. That's news to me.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about, and you already went to answer the question about how it was to make that character sympathetic and get people to root for him. But it's a redemption arc, and I don't know if I've ever written a redemption arc before, but I bet that would be difficult.
I mean, I liked it. It's kind of fun to do, because I think on a certain level we all crave that. I mean, I don't know anyone who doesn't have things that they have done that they wish they hadn't done, or wish they had done differently, or had handled differently. And, I mean, there's difference in levels, but that doesn't matter, because everyone's experience is their own experience, right? And so I think that that's another one of those human experiences or human conditions that we can all sort of resonate with. This idea of, I've done things I'm not proud of. I need to make up for it, or I need to move on from it. Maybe it can't be made up for, but I still have to move on. I can't just stop. I can't just lay down and die.
I think one of the hardest parts would be is how do you make the person bad enough in the beginning to make the redemption arc a real redemption arc? Because I think most writers, you feel like when you're writing, if I write this horrible person, then people are going to think this is stuff I made up, so I must be that horrible person. So how do you make them bad enough?
Don't worry about that.
Yeah, and you're like, oh yeah, they're gonna really think I'm a psychopath after
I'm really, yeah, exactly. I absolutely 100% don't want people to see this podcast and be like, oh God, she's a Nazi sympathizer.
Right.
I'm not, for the record, I am not. I am
not.
You didn't kill the dog. It's
1940s.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show or in the blurb. Not a Nazi sympathizer. Right there. But like, so we talk a lot about George R.R. Martin, and I don't know how, and if you read his books or watch the movies, even there's really no good guys or bad guys. Everybody's on a continuum, and in parts of the story arc, they're good, and parts are bad. And you root for people that you don't want to root for, doing things you want to be successful in things. If you really stop and think about it, like, why am I rooting for this person?
Right.
And that's very challenging, but you wonder how he got over that. Probably just lots of writing and experience, because you'd have to think that George R. R. Martin would worry about the people like, this guy must have a really dark inner life to write some of those, especially if you've read the books, because the books are like way more graphic and intense and detailed than the shows. So
I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'll tell you that I think the way that you make your character dark enough is you think about you think about something that scares you, I guess, and that something that scares you. Maybe I'm sharing too much, but maybe that scares you about yourself, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And
something you wouldn't want to be accused of. Like, if people thought I was this way, this would be something I couldn't live with. That.
Right. And then you figure out, okay, what makes this person human, right? What is, and again, you really try to put yourself into that, or at least this is how I've done it. I really try to put myself into Lena's head and think, okay, I'm in this situation. These are the choices that I've made. These are the choices that I'm now faced with. How do I make these things? How do I do the things that are for the good? What decisions am I going to make if I am essentially a good person? Because that's maybe that's an underlying assumption of the redemption arc, is not necessarily that people are at their core good, but that maybe at their core
they're striving to be good, and they
do the right thing. They want to be good, because otherwise, why would you bother with redemption, right?
And it's I think it's Sean Coyne and the writers, what's it called, the story grid. The story grid, but he has things he calls, like, when you do your things, you have the best of two bad choices, or irreconcilable goods, like where you get this, but it's good, but you have to lose this other good thing because they're not reconcilable. And I think all those types of a true dilemma, those types of choices you can't come back from, is what makes characters well-rounded and deep. How do they deal? Like, in what's the Man in the High Castle? Or there's the main villain in that. I remember I only watched the first season, but there's a scene where, and he's a horrible person. He's just really a horrible person. But there's a scene where he's been told by the Reich that he has to kill his son because his son is disabled, and he finds out. And so the doctor keeps giving him this kit to go kill his son. And what's going to happen, because he goes off the doctor and then he kills the doctor instead, to cover up the fact that his son has whatever illness he has. And you root for him in that moment, even though he just committed a murder. Right. He's picking from two bad choices. I can kill my own son, or I can kill this doctor who's going to tell me that he has to be killed by the law of that society. And so that's a horrible character, but he has this dilemma that's impossible.
Right. And the choice that they make, like, I think the key to making your villainous character, your anti-hero, sympathetic in that particular instance is you have to make them make the choice that's going to resonate with the audience, right? So I had something very, very similar in the very first, in the opening scenes with The World Asunder. Here's this character that if you've read the first book, I've already established her as a villain, a bad guy, right? And she's done terrible things. She sent people to their deaths. And I put her in a situation where I flash her back to the sack of Berlin, where she's hiding in a cellar with her neighbor's 3 young daughters. And the cellar gets broken into by a couple of soldiers, Red Army soldiers. And they're obviously inebriated and obviously bent on mayhem and on doing terrible things to these little girls. And she stops them. And she stops them in a horrific manner by murdering one of them with her psychic power, which is, in that universe for psychics, is worse than murdering. Like, if she shot him with a gun, that would be less heinous than killing him with her power. Right. That's the ultimate taboo, right? Yeah. And she does this, and 3 little girls watch her do it. And the soldiers, two buddies, see it, and they just leave. And it's a bad situation, right? But she chose, rather than choose to let she chose to commit a murder in a heinous way versus to let these 3 children be victimized. Yeah. And that's the choice that allows the audience to start to see her as a human worthy of redemption, as someone who's like, you know what, I would make that same choice.
Right.
Yeah, I'd root for her.
She did what she had to do.
Right, exactly. Did what you had to do. Yep.
Yeah, and she could have, in the other option is just to be a coward and try to rationalize that it didn't happen, or be in denial, or all those different things. But instead, she actually took a heroic action, even though it was horrific.
Right.
So it starts that character arc.
Yep.
There's something really satisfying about these redemption stories, to have someone who's could be your enemy, or could be you when you are your own enemy, and then by the end of the book, that they're able to find a salvation from that. They're able to turn it around. And I know, like earlier, we were joking about, not a Nazi sympathizer, but
which I wasn't joking. I am not.
No. Let's clarify that.
I've got expectations. There is nothing more satisfying than seeing the bad guy repent and become a new person and
come to the light.
And out of all the bad guys we could pick, in today's society, wouldn't we just love? Wouldn't it be so exciting and wonderful to know that we don't have to be divided? There is hope. There's people can change, people can learn, people can grow, people can be redeemed. And if a Nazi can do it, like a psychic murdering Nazi woman can do it, we can do it together.
Sure,
yeah. Everybody's got a chance at redemption.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I certainly wasn't going into the book with all of those high-minded ideals.
Just writing the story.
Yeah, that was just, but that was the story that Lena wanted told, if that makes sense.
That's where it went. Well, it's kind of where it had to go. They say, you have to write a story that the ending's inevitable, inevitable, but surprising. So when you get to the end, that's the story. That's the journey she had to take. I mean, from what,
Do you find it easier to write villain characters? Do their voices come quicker?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes they're more clear. And a lot of times I think it's because I create them as a foil to the main character. So it's a lot, it's easier to zone in on that first character trait that I'm like, okay, so here's this person that I've figured out something about, and here's this other person in opposition to that. So the opposition piece is, I don't have to sift through my mental list of character traits. It's usually pretty easy. And also, there might be something wrong with me, but I always like the villains better. They're just, a lot of times they seem to be more fun,
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, in Minds of Men, Evie spends a lot of time and a lot of angst on this idea that, she's doing things with her powers that she's been taught are not right, and in the end she also does what she has to do, but it bothers her a lot. Lena's a lot more pragmatic. She's like, all right, well, I'm not gonna let you hurt these girls, so instead I'm gonna make your brain explode, and she just moves on from it. She's like, okay, that happened, it was heinous, and it was something that I was taught was heinous, but I did it, and I do it again, and I don't feel bad about it.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting you bring that up, though, but if you think about most books, is a lot of the setup for most fiction is kind of the hero's journey. They're trying to, they refuse the call, and then they do this, and they're trying to figure out who they are. But the villains almost always start the story. They have a purpose. They know who they are, and they're going after their goal.
Right.
And there's something appealing about that, even if they're kind of horrible sometimes.
So I was rewatching Downton Abbey because I'm in love with it, and the movie's coming out in September. And I was watching, like, I guess it was season 2. Yeah, I think it was season 2. And if you're not familiar, I'm sorry, but there's this character, Matthew Crawley, in the whole story, and he's like the heir to this estate, and he ends up going off to the Great War and fighting in the war, and he comes back and he's injured, and I loved Downton Abbey, and I loved the character Matthew Crawley, but this time around I wanted to punch him because he was like, oh, I love you, but I can't be with you because I'll never walk again. And it's like, come on, man. Like, is it really that hard? If she loved you, why are you gonna send her away and break her heart and yours? I mean, stop being such a fucking martyr. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. You do what you have to do. And I don't know, maybe it's just that I'm older and more impatient with that stuff. But but that's, villains oftentimes don't have to do stuff like that. Villains are just like, this is what I want. I'm going to go for it.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't have to be a person because your antagonist technically can be anything that stands in the way of so the lack of ability to have radios in the planes could be an antagonistic force.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Rick Partlow adds on, I think the main thing to remember is that the antagonist isn't always a villain. Yes.
Right. Sure.
The antagonist could be the secondary character who's just, maybe distracting somehow influencing the main character, like to do something other than their calling,
Right. And, I'm thinking about it, and in The World Asunder, the antagonist really, honestly, is Soviet Russia, is this, this force of communism, I guess, that was, coming down and starting to exert control over the world that Lena was living in, the actual world that she was living in, and trying to and sort of preventing her from healing, and yet because of the events that happen and the things that happen to her, it actually enables her to make the choices that are necessary for her healing. So, but yeah, I didn't really have a single, opposing character for Lena in the second book. It was really just more the situation that she was in.
Yeah. Impossible situation. Choices.
Yeah.
Well, we were going to ask you about anthologies, but
we didn't get this deep into the anthologies as was the plan.
2 minutes.
So,
all right,
quickly with anthologies. What are the top tips you would suggest to authors who are wanting to submit to anthologies? Write your stories. Write a lot of stories. Look for open calls and write your best stories and submit. Write and submit. Network with people. Go to. For me, I can't overstate how the importance of networking and the friendships that I've made in this business. Literally every break that I've had in my career has come from friendships that I've made, most of them at conventions. So go to conventions, go to, hang out in Facebook groups, do podcasts, go to 20 books, all of those things. But network, not just for the business aspect of it, but also for the writing aspect, because you get to know people, you get to know different types of people, you talk about different techniques and you read their stuff and you see what they like, or you see what you like from what they've done, and, you can emulate and I don't mean plagiarize, but I'm saying, I like the way that this person handled this particular situation. I'm going to work that into my own stuff. So, yeah, write and network. That's what I would say. Write, submit, and network. That's 3 tips.
1, 2, 3. As fast as you can. There we go.
Do all of those. All right. So yeah, since we're coming down to the wire, thank you for coming and hanging out with us.
Yeah.
We always love
ad nauseum about my book.
No, it's been awesome. Time flies.
Oh yeah. Can you let everyone know where they can find you, how they can find you? Shameless plugs.
Absolutely. So my website is www.kaceyezell.net. You can find me on Facebook. I have an author page that's Kacey Ezell, spelled just like that. And then my personal page is also on Facebook, and I interact as both all the time. You can find me in the CKP Factory Floor group quite a bit. Also in the Four Horsemen Universe group. We didn't really talk much about Four Horsemen stuff, but I'm one of the core authors and very active in that world as well. You can find my books on Amazon. All of them are also listed on my webpage. My latest work is The World of Sunder. That's what we've been talking about all night. That is out on Amazon. It's free on Kindle Unlimited right now. And so is Minds of Men, the first book in the series. Also, recent releases, the anthology Noir Fatale came out in May. That's available on Amazon and from Bing.com. And then We Dare, edited by Jamie Ibsen and Chris Kennedy, available on Amazon and through ChrisKennedyPublishing.com. So hopefully that was enough.
Goodness.
Fantastic.
And throw a dart, find Kacey.
What's that?
Just to let you guys know. You throw a dart, you can find Kacey.
Yeah, probably.
All right, so let us know what you thought about the show in the comments, and be sure to give us a thumb butt.
Thumb butt.
Don't do that.
Please don't give me
Butt
that.
thumb.
I don't want that.
We always put it in with a butt thumb. I knew the show was going to go there at some point.
We got to clean too.
All my fault.
Like,
Remember to
share,
like-
subscribe. It's the right thing to do.
Yes, share, subscribe, hit the bell, hit subscribe. For Scott Moon, Lauren Moore, I'm Kalene Williams. Thank you for joining us tonight on live. And I was about to say Writer's Journey. Be sure to come back and join us next time as we talk about reading, writing, and everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium.